In America's power arena, who wins the game? Welcome to American Power Play, your source for U.S. political...
Madam Chairwoman, with all due respect, which is none, you're exactly what's wrong with America. Representative Ilhan Omar's voice sliced through the Senate hearing room like a blade forged in fury, her words dripping with unbridled contempt. She wasn't even glancing at the nominee she was supposed to be testifying about. Her piercing gaze was locked directly on the elderly senator from Louisiana. Her finger pointed accusingly across the chamber like a prosecutor's indictment. You sit there in your cheap suits with your fake folksy accent, pretending to be some simple country lawyer. But we all know what you really are. A relic of the Jim Crow South, a defender of white supremacy, a man whose entire career has been built on keeping people who look like me out of power. The hearing room plunged into stunned silence, as if the air itself had been sucked out. Even the C-SPAN cameras seemed to hold their breath, capturing the moment in unflinching detail. Chairman Gary Peters shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gavel hovering uncertainly, unsure whether to intervene and risk escalating the chaos. Republican senators exchanged sharp glances, anger flashing in their eyes like lightning before a storm. In the gallery, progressive activists nodded approvingly, their phones already buzzing with live tweets, while conservative observers leaned forward, anticipation etched on their faces. Senator John Kennedy sat motionless at the dais, his reading glasses perched precariously on his nose, a yellow legal pad spread before him. He didn't look up, didn't flinch, didn't react, just kept doodling what appeared to be a small crawfish in the margin of his notes, as if the verbal assault was nothing more than background noise. Omar interpreted his silence as weakness, a crack in the facade she could exploit. It was the biggest mistake of her political career. Emboldened, she leaned forward, her voice rising like a crescendo in a fiery sermon. "Nothing to say, Senator?" she taunted, playing to the cameras, to her social media team frantically live-tweeting in the back row, to the progressive outlets already drafting their Omar destroys GOP senator headlines. Or are you too busy figuring out which Confederate talking point to use next? Tell me, do you still think the South will rise again? Do you lie awake at night, angry that people like me, a black, Muslim, immigrant woman, have the audacity to sit in the same Congress as you? Her voice echoed off the chamber walls, laced with righteous indignation, each accusation a calculated strike designed to rally her base and dismantle her opponent. In the witness section beside Omar, Governor Kristi Noem sat with remarkable composure, her hands folded neatly on the table, her face betraying nothing. She'd endured 2 hours of relentless accusations from Omar about her record as South Dakota's governor, her positions on immigration, her alleged Islamophobia. Noem had defended herself calmly, professionally, citing facts and policy outcomes with unflappable precision. But Omar, growing frustrated with Noem's unyielding responses, had decided to redirect her attack to what she perceived as a more vulnerable target, or so she thought. Kennedy slowly removed his glasses, folded them carefully, and set them on the table next to a thick manila folder labeled simply, I, Omar, Financial Records and Ethics Violations. The movement was deliberate, almost theatrical in its precision, drawing every eye in the room. Several reporters in the press section noticed the folder's label and began typing furiously on their laptops, their stories already taking shape. Omar's communications director, watching from the gallery, felt a cold knot form in her stomach, a premonition of the storm about to break. When Kennedy finally looked up, his eyes were calm, almost kind, but there was something underneath, a sharpness that his folksy demeanor usually concealed, like a bayou alligator lurking just below the surface. "Miss Omar," he drawled, his Louisiana accent thick as molasses, each word coming slow and measured. "I appreciate your passion. I truly do. But before you tell the American people what kind of man I am, I think they deserve to know what kind of woman you are." He opened the folder with the care of a surgeon making the first incision. "Let's start with the $4.5 million you paid your husband's company from campaign funds. Then we'll get to the tax fraud. You know, the part where you filed joint returns with a man you weren't legally married to, and the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board found you guilty and fined you. Then the money you took from people who stole food from children. That Feeding Our Future scandal, where you kept donations from convicted felons until the FBI forced your hand." Omar's confident expression began to crack, like ice under pressure. "And if we have time," Kennedy continued, his voice never losing its gentle quality, "we'll discuss your little speech in Somali, where you told your supporters you're Somali first, Muslim second, and American, well, I guess American comes in a distant third, doesn't it?" The color drained from Omar's face, her lawyer sitting directly behind her leaning forward to whisper urgently in her ear. She shook him off, but her hands had begun to tremble. "You came here to destroy Governor Noem's reputation with lies and accusations you can't prove," Kennedy said, his tone still maddeningly pleasant. "You called me a racist without evidence. You accused a decorated public servant of white supremacy based on policy disagreements. But, ma'am, I've got a whole folder of evidence about you, and unlike your accusations, every word I'm about to say is documented, proven, and in some cases resulted in criminal penalties and ethics violations." The Kennedy smile was gentle, almost grandfatherly, but his eyes were steel. "So sit back down, Ms. Omar. Class is in session, and the lesson today is about the difference between accusation and proof, between theater and truth, between what you claim to be, a champion of the marginalized, and what you actually are." He adjusted his reading glasses and pulled the first document from the folder. "Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me, I have some questions for the witness. Real questions about real documents with real consequences." Chairman Peters, still off balance from Omar's initial attack, could only nod. "Proceed, Senator Kennedy." Omar remained standing for a moment longer, her chest heaving with barely controlled rage. "Senator, you can't intimidate me with your—" "Sit down, ma'am," Kennedy said softly. It wasn't a request. Slowly, Omar sank back into her chair, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening. Her social media team had stopped tweeting. The progressive activists in the gallery had gone quiet. Even the most partisan Democratic senators on the committee looked uncomfortable. The bayou was about to swallow another predator whole. Chairman Peters cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the hearing. "Senator Kennedy, I want to remind you that Representative Omar is here as a witness regarding Governor Noem's nomination. We should keep our focus on—" "Mr. Chairman, with all due respect," Kennedy interrupted gently, "Ms. Omar made this about character. She questioned Governor Noem's fitness to serve based on alleged bias and ethical concerns. She then extended those character attacks to me personally, calling me a white supremacist and a relic of Jim Crow on national television." He paused, letting that sink in. "Well, sir, I believe that when someone comes before this committee and makes those kinds of accusations, their own character becomes immediately relevant. If Ms. Omar is going to be our moral compass on questions of ethics and fitness for office, we need to calibrate that compass. And from what I can see in these documents, that compass is pointing in some mighty troubling directions." Senator Rand Paul leaned into his microphone. "Mr. Chairman, I agree with Senator Kennedy. The witness's credibility is absolutely germane to her testimony. She's made serious accusations. We have a right, indeed an obligation, to examine whether she has the standing to make them. Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Connecticut Democrat, objected. This is highly irregular. We don't typically interrogate House members who come to testify. We also don't typically have House members come here and call sitting senators white supremacists, Kennedy drawled. But here we are. Ms. Omar opened this door. I'm just walking through it. Peters looked around the dais at his fellow committee members, reading the room. The Republicans were unified behind Kennedy. Even some Democrats looked like they wanted to hear where this was going. Omar had never been popular with the old guard, and her inflammatory rhetoric had caused headaches for leadership before. Proceed, Senator Kennedy, Peters said finally, but keep it relevant to the witness's credibility regarding the nomination. Oh, I promise you, Mr. Chairman, Kennedy said, turning his full attention to Omar. This is all relevant. He opened the folder fully, revealing neatly organized sections with colored tabs. Yellow for financial records, blue for tax documents, red for criminal connections, green for foreign loyalty questions. Now, Ms. Omar, you've spent the morning lecturing us about Governor Noem's alleged ethical failings. You said she's unfit to serve because of her values and judgment. So, let's examine your values and judgment, shall we? Omar's lawyer whispered to her again. This time she listened, nodding slightly. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, but the edge of panic was unmistakable. Senator, I came here to testify about a nominee, not to be subjected to a partisan witch hunt. Partisan? Kennedy's eyebrows rose innocently. Ma'am, I'm just asking about publicly available documents. Your campaign finance reports are public. Your tax violations are a matter of state record. The FBI indictments in the Feeding Our Future case are public. There's nothing partisan about facts. He pulled out the first document, a financial disclosure form. Let me start with something simple. The E Street Group. That's your husband, Tim Manette's consulting company, correct? Omar hesitated. Yes. And your campaign has paid the E Street Group. Let's see. He made a show of studying the paper. In total, from 2018 through 2024, approximately $4.5 million. Is that accurate? My campaign has paid for legitimate consulting services. I didn't ask if they were legitimate, ma'am. I asked if the number is accurate. $4.5 million. Yes or no? Omar's jaw tightened. The total amount paid for digital consulting, fundraising consulting, and travel is disclosed in my FEC reports. So that's a yes, thank you. Kennedy pulled out another document. Now, let's talk about the timeline of these payments, because it's mighty interesting. In 2018, before you and Mr. Minette were involved, your campaign paid his company $21,547. Reasonable amount for a House race, nothing unusual. He looked up at her, his expression mild. But then something changed. In 2019, the payments jumped to $523,000. That's a 2,400% increase, Ms. Omar. What changed in 2019? My campaign expanded. What changed in 2019, Kennedy continued as if she hadn't spoken, is that you began an affair with Mr. Minette. Both of you were married to other people at the time. Dr. Beth Minette, Tim's wife, actually filed for divorce, citing your relationship with her husband. That's a matter of public court record. Omar's face flushed. My personal life is not. Your personal life became relevant when you started paying your lover's company massive amounts of campaign money, ma'am. Let's continue with the timeline. In 2020, After your affair became public and you left your husband for Mr. Manette, the payments increased again to $1.1 million. He displayed a chart on the screen behind him, showing the dramatic escalation of payments coinciding with her relationship. Then, after you married Mr. Minette in 2020, the payments just kept climbing. $1.3 million in 2021, $1.6 million in 2022, $1.8 million in 2023. Through September of 2024, you've already paid him $2.1 million. Total $4.5 million to your husband's company. Kennedy let the numbers hang in the air like a noose. Now, Ms. Omar, the House Ethics Committee has clear guidelines about this kind of thing. Campaign funds can't be used for personal benefit. But when you're paying your spouse millions while having a romantic relationship, that sure looks like personal benefit to lots of people. Can you explain how this isn't self-dealing? The services provided were at market rate and market rate? Kennedy pulled out another document. According to the Campaign Finance Institute, the average congressional campaign spends between $150,000 and $300,000 on all digital consulting. You're paying one vendor, your husband, over $2 million a year. That's not market rate, ma'am. That's something else entirely. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of casual curiosity. Let me read you some of these expense descriptions from your FEC reports. Your campaign paid the E Street Group for strategic travel to California at $15,000, digital consultation dinner meeting at $8,500, fundraising retreat expenses at $22,000, and my personal favorite, research travel to Martha's Vineyard at $18,000. Kennedy looked up with exaggerated confusion. Martha's Vineyard, Ms. Omar? What kind of digital consulting requires trips to Martha's Vineyard? Because where I come from, that sounds an awful lot like a vacation funded by campaign donors. The hearing room buzzed with reaction. Reporters typed furiously. Camera operators zoomed in on Omar's face, capturing her barely controlled fury. Senator Kennedy, Omar said, her voice tight, you're taking legitimate business expenses out of context to create a false narrative. Context? Kennedy pulled out a thick stack of papers. All right, let's give it some context. These are FEC complaints filed by the National Legal and Policy Center, the Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust, and Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Let me read from one of them. He put on his glasses and began reading. Representative Omar's campaign has funneled millions to her husband's firm in what appears to be a scheme to convert campaign funds for personal use. The dramatic increase in payments, coinciding with their romantic relationship, raises serious questions about self-dealing and potential criminal violations of campaign finance law. Kennedy looked up at Omar. Now, the FEC dismissed these complaints, but not because you didn't do what you're accused of. They dismissed them citing prosecutorial discretion, which means they chose not to pursue it, not that it didn't happen. Big difference. Omar shot to her feet. This is a disgusting smear campaign. You're attacking me because I'm a black Muslim woman who dares to speak truth to— No, ma'am, Kennedy interrupted, his voice still maddeningly calm. I'm questioning you because you attacked Governor Noem without evidence, while your own record is full of documented misconduct. This has nothing to do with your race or religion, both of which are irrelevant to questions of ethics and law. This is about your conduct, and whether you have the moral authority to judge others. He opened the second section of his folder. Now, if you're done with the identity politics deflection, let's move on to the tax fraud. Miss Omar, did you file joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi in 2014 and 2015? Omar's lawyer stood up. "Mr. Chairman, I need to consult with my client." "She can consult after she answers," Kennedy said pleasantly. "It's a simple yes or no question, Ms. Omar. Did you file joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi in 2014 and 2015? Omar's mouth opened and closed. Finally, she said, "I filed tax returns consistent with my family status at the time." "The problem, ma'am, is that according to legal marriage records, you weren't married to Ahmed Hirsi in 2014 and 2015. You were legally married to Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi, a different man entirely, and Minnesota doesn't recognize common law marriage. So, you filed joint tax returns with someone who wasn't your legal spouse, while still married to someone else." The Minnesota Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board investigated this. Would you like to know what they found? The room was absolutely silent. Kennedy read from an official document. "There is sufficient evidence that Representative Omar filed joint tax returns with a person who was not her legal spouse. The evidence includes tax documents, marriage licenses, and divorce filings. Representative Omar has been ordered to reimburse $3,400 and pay a civil penalty of $500. He set down the document carefully. "Ms. Omar, you were found guilty by your own state's ethics board. You paid a fine. That's an admission of wrongdoing. You broke Minnesota law. And now you come here to lecture us about Governor Noem following the law?" Omar sat back down heavily, her face pale. Her lawyer was writing notes urgently, preparing some response. But Kennedy wasn't done. "Here's what bothers me most, Ms. Omar. You came here today to question Governor Noem's ethics. You said she's unfit to serve because of her alleged values. But let's compare your records, shall we?" He held up 2 sheets of paper. "Governor Noem has been investigated by ethics watchdogs exactly 0 times. You've been investigated by the FEC multiple times, the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board, the House Ethics Committee, and various nonprofit watchdog groups. Governor Noem has never paid family members from government or campaign funds. You've paid your husband $4.5 million. Governor Noem's opponents question her policies. Your opponents question whether you've committed crimes." He set down the papers and looked directly at her. "And yet you come here to lecture us about fitness for office? Ma'am, with respect, that takes a special kind of audacity." Omar was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but they seemed more from rage than remorse. "You came here today," Kennedy continued, his voice softer but no less cutting, "and you called Governor Noem cruel. You said her policies hurt vulnerable communities. You positioned yourself as a champion of the marginalized, a defender of the powerless. But Governor Noem has never taken money from people who stole from children. Governor Noem has never kept donations from federal criminals. Governor Noem has never had to return money out of an abundance of caution because she got caught." He closed the folder. "So tell me, Ms. Omar, who lacks character? The governor who enforces laws to protect communities? Or the congresswoman who takes money from people who steal food from children and only gives it back when the FBI makes her?" The silence that followed was absolute. Finally, Senator Blumenthal spoke up, his voice subdued. "Mr. Chairman, I think we've heard enough. Perhaps we should move on to—" "Oh, we're not done," Kennedy said pleasantly, the folksy drawl returning. "We haven't even discussed Ms. Omar's anti-Semitic statements, her removal from the Foreign Affairs Committee, or her speech declaring herself Somali first, Muslim second. But I can sense people getting tired." He looked at Chairman Peters. "Mr. Chairman, I'll make this quick. Just a few more questions about foreign loyalty, and then I'll yield. Peters looked like he wanted to end the hearing entirely, but couldn't find a procedural way out. Proceed, Senator Kennedy. Kennedy opened his final folder. Ms. Omar, on February 10, 2019, you tweeted, "It's all about the Benjamin's baby," in reference to congressional support for Israel. When asked who you thought was paying lawmakers, you responded, AIPAC. Do you stand by that statement? I was criticizing lobbying influence. You invoked an anti-Semitic trope. Kennedy interrupted, the idea that Jews use money to control politicians. Your own Democratic colleagues condemned it. Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Hoyer, Chairman Engel, all condemned your statement as anti-Semitic. The House passed a resolution because of your words. Do you understand why comparing support for Israel to Jewish money-buying influence is anti-Semitic? Omar's face hardened. I have consistently opposed all lobbying, but you specifically singled out AIPAC, not the Saudi lobby, not the Qatar lobby, not the Turkish lobby, just the Jewish one. And when you were criticized, you issued a non-apology, saying you were sorry people were offended. That's not an apology, ma'am. That's a deflection. He pulled out more documents. Let's look at the pattern. May 2018, you tweeted that Israel has hypnotized the world, another anti-Semitic trope about Jewish mind control. March 2019. You accused supporters of Israel of having allegiance to a foreign country, questioning Jewish Americans' dual loyalty. June 2019, you compared Israel to Nazi Germany. And in October 2023, after Hamas massacred 1,200 Israelis, you tweeted about oppression without condemning the attacks. Kennedy set down the papers. Ms. Omar, this isn't criticism of Israeli policy. This is a pattern of using anti-Semitic language. And it had consequences. In February 2023, the House voted to remove you from the Foreign Affairs Committee. You're the first member in 20 years to be removed from a committee for conduct reasons. Even some Democrats voted for your removal. He leaned forward. And yet, you have the audacity to question Governor Noem's sensitivity to minority communities? Omar opened her mouth to respond, but Kennedy held up his hand. One more thing. On January 27, 2024, you gave a speech in Minnesota to a Somali-American audience. The speech was in Somali. You probably thought most Americans wouldn't understand it. But it was recorded and translated. Would you like to hear what you said? He pressed play on a recording. Omar's voice filled the chamber, speaking in Somali, with English subtitles appearing on the screen. We are an organized society. We are people who know they are Somalis first, Muslims second. We must protect Somali interests. The U.S. government will only do what Somalis in the U.S. tell them to do. They will do what we want, and nothing else. The recording stopped. The hearing room erupted. Kennedy's voice cut through the chaos. Ms. Omar, did you just say, on tape, that you are Somali first, not American first, and that you expect the U.S. government to do what Somalia wants? Omar was screaming now. That's a mistranslation, a deliberate distortion. We had 3 independent Somali translators review it, Kennedy said calmly. All 3 confirmed the translation is accurate. I can bring them in to testify if you'd like. He stood up, gathering his folders. Ms. Omar, let me ask you directly. Do you consider yourself American first or Somali first? I'm proud of my heritage. That's not what I asked. American first or Somali first? It's a simple question. Omar sat silent, her lawyer pulling at her arm, urging her not to answer. Kennedy nodded slowly. Your silence speaks volumes, ma'am, because When Governor Noem takes the oath of office, she will swear to defend the United States Constitution, not South Dakota's interests, not her ethnic community's interests, America's interests. Can you say the same?" He turned to Chairman Peters. "Mr. Chairman, I'm done with this witness. She has no credibility to judge anyone's character or fitness for office. I move that we end her testimony and proceed directly to a vote on Governor Noem's nomination." Chairman Peters seized the opportunity. "Ms. Omar, you're dismissed. Thank you for your testimony. We'll take a 30-minute recess before proceeding with additional questions for Governor Noem." Omar stood on shaky legs, her lawyer supporting her elbow as she walked toward the exit. Reporters shouted questions. She ignored them all, her face a mask of barely controlled fury and humiliation. Her social media team had packed up their equipment and left during Kennedy's final questioning. Several of her staffers had fled the gallery. The progressive activists who'd cheered her opening attack sat in stunned silence. As people filed out, Kennedy remained seated, organizing his folders. He caught Governor Noem's eye and gave her a small nod. She returned it with the faintest smile. Omar had called her racist, Islamophobic, and unfit. Noem had proven her wrong in every way that mattered. The bayou had only just begun to feed. When the hearing reconvened, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Word had spread through the Capitol about what was happening in room 216. More senators had arrived, filling empty seats at the dais. The press section was now standing room only. C-SPAN's viewership had spiked from its usual modest numbers to over 2 million concurrent viewers. On Twitter, the hashtags were staggering. Kennedy destroys Omar, 3.2 million tweets, /Omar exposed, 2.8 million tweets, /confirm Noem, 1.4 million tweets. Video clips from the hearing had already been viewed over 50 million times. Conservative media was in rapture. Liberal media was in crisis mode, trying to figure out how to spin the debacle. Mainstream outlets were simply reporting the facts, which were damning enough on their own. Within an hour, Omar held a press conference in a Capitol corridor, surrounded by progressive allies, including Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley, along with representatives from CAIR and other advocacy groups. She attempted to reclaim the narrative. "Today, I was subjected to a racist, Islamophobic attack by Senator Kennedy," she began, her voice shaking with emotion. Rather than discuss Governor Noem's dangerous record, he chose to attack me personally, using right-wing talking points, conspiracy theories, and documents taken out of context. This is what happens when a black Muslim woman dares to speak truth to power. They try to silence us. They try to smear us. They try to make us the issue instead of addressing the real concerns about nominees who will hurt our communities. She wiped tears from her eyes. "I will not be silenced. I will not be intimidated. And I will continue fighting for marginalized communities, regardless of how many old white men try to tear me down." A reporter raised his hand. "Congresswoman, Senator Kennedy cited specific documents, FEC filings, Minnesota Ethics Board findings, FBI indictments, your own financial disclosures. Are those facts wrong?" Omar glared at him. "I'm not going to dignify these smears with a response. My record speaks for itself." Another reporter. "But the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board did fine you for tax violations. That's public record. And the people who gave you money were convicted in the Feeding Our Future case. How do you explain that?" "This press conference is over," Omar snapped, turning away. "Congresswoman, what about the Somali speech? Did you say—" Omar and her entourage fled down the corridor, leaving reporters shouting questions at their backs. When the hearing reconvened, the final vote came 2 days later on the Senate floor. Despite Democratic opposition, Kristi Noem was confirmed 51-49, strictly along party lines, but the story wasn't really about Noem anymore. It was about what had happened to Ilhan Omar. Within minutes of the hearing adjourning, the video clips went viral, not in the typical political bubble way, truly viral. TikTok teenagers who'd never watched C-SPAN were sharing Kennedy's sit-down ma'am moment. Instagram was flooded with the $4.5 million payment timeline. YouTube channels that usually covered gaming were posting reaction videos to Kennedy's systematic destruction. By midnight, the hearing had 127 million video views across all platforms, generated 8.4 million tweets, been covered by over 3,000 news outlets globally, spawned 47 different meme formats, and trended #1 in 23 countries. Fox News ran the hearing footage in prime time with the chyron, "Kennedy exposes Omar's corruption." The network's ratings for that evening broadcast were the highest in 6 months, beating even election night coverage from weeks prior. CNN, initially reluctant to cover what looked like a GOP attack, found themselves forced to report the facts after their own investigative team confirmed every document Kennedy had cited. Anderson Cooper opened his show with, "Whatever your politics, what happened in the Senate today was remarkable. A sitting congresswoman's credibility was systematically dismantled using her own financial records, public statements, and documented ethics violations." MSNBC tried to frame it as an attack on a Muslim woman of color, but even their hosts struggled with the optics. Joy Reid attempted a defense. What we saw today was coordinated, but was interrupted by her own panel. A Democratic strategist cut in, "Joy, I've seen those FEC filings. The payments to her husband are real. The Minnesota ethics violation is real. We can't defend this." By morning, the New York Times had published a 4,000-word investigative piece titled "The Money Trail: How Ilhan Omar's Campaign Finances Became a Liability." The Washington Post followed with "Feeding Our Future," the fraud case that consumed $250 million and touched a congresswoman's campaign. International outlets picked up the story. The BBC ran it as their lead. U.S. Congresswoman's testimony backfires spectacularly. Even Al Jazeera, typically sympathetic to Omar, covered it with surprising objectivity. Questions mount over Representative Omar's financial dealings. The first shoe dropped on day 3. Don Samuels, a Minneapolis city councilman who had nearly defeated Omar in the 2022 primary, announced he would challenge her again. This time, he wasn't alone. 3 major Minnesota Democratic donors, previously unwilling to go against Omar, publicly pledged their support. "Representative Omar has become a distraction from the real work we need to do," Samuels said at his announcement. "The people of Minnesota's 5th District deserve representation that's focused on their needs, not mired in scandal after scandal." His campaign launch raised $890,000 in 48 hours, more than Omar had raised in the entire previous quarter. Within a week, the House Ethics Committee announced it was reviewing matters related to Representative Omar's campaign finance practices. The carefully worded statement was devastating. Ethics rarely announced investigations unless they had substantial evidence. By week 2, the consequences accelerated. Political isolation. Nancy Pelosi, asked about Omar, said only, "The Ethics Committee will handle it appropriately." No defense, no "let's wait for facts," just ice-cold distance. Chuck Schumer, when pressed, said, "Representative Omar is in the House. That's not my chamber." He literally walked away from the reporter mid-question. Even the squad fractured. AOC issued a statement supporting due process, but conspicuously didn't defend Omar's actions. Rashida Tlaib said nothing. Ayanna Pressley quietly unfollowed Omar on Twitter. Committee assignments. The House Democratic leadership suggested Omar resign from the Budget Committee. She refused. They removed her anyway by a procedural vote, with 14 Democrats joining Republicans. Her remaining committee seat on Education and Labor became ceremonial. Other members stopped inviting her to bill negotiations. Back home in Minneapolis, her district approval rating crashed from 62% to 38% in 3 weeks. A 24-point collapse, unprecedented for an incumbent in a safe seat. The Somali American community, which had been her base, split bitterly. Younger activists defended her, but elders were furious. One community leader told Minnesota Public Radio, "She told the world, we don't consider ourselves Americans first. She made us all look disloyal. It's shameful." The Somali First clip played on every local news station. She couldn't escape it. Financial collapse. Major donors fled. Act Blue removed her from featured campaigns after complaints. Her Q4 fundraising dropped 73% compared to the previous year. Meanwhile, her Republican opponent, a Somali-American Republican businessman named Royce White, raised $2.1 million, setting a record for a GOP challenger in her district. The final humiliation: 2 months after the hearing, federal prosecutors in Minnesota announced expanded charges in the Feeding Our Future case. During the press conference, the U.S. attorney was asked about Omar's connections to the defendants. "Representative Omar is not charged with any crime," he said carefully. "However, we have documented that several defendants used political connections to further their scheme. We believe their donations to political campaigns were attempts to buy influence and protection. Those campaigns kept the money for months after the fraud became public. We'll let voters draw their own conclusions." That statement, clinical and restrained, was more damaging than any accusation. Omar's lawyer immediately released a statement. "Representative Omar has been fully cleared." But the prosecutor had never cleared her. He just said she wasn't charged. The distinction mattered. By month 3, Omar announced she wouldn't seek re-election. The statement claimed she wanted to focus on advocacy work outside Congress, but everyone knew the truth. She'd been forced out. Internal polling showed her losing the primary by 18 points. Her final speech on the House floor was sparsely attended. Most Democrats found reasons to be elsewhere. She spoke about her immigrant journey, her pride in representation, her fight for justice. She never mentioned the hearing, never mentioned Kennedy, never acknowledged the scandals. When she finished, the applause was polite, brief, and hollow. She walked out of the chamber she'd entered just 6 years earlier with such promise. Her political career over at 42. Senator John Kennedy experienced the opposite trajectory. The Monday after the hearing, he arrived at his Senate office to find it buried in flowers, thank you notes, and gifts from constituents. His staff had to rent a storage unit for the overflow. One card from a Louisiana teacher read, "You showed my students that truth still matters. Thank you for defending it." His fundraising numbers were staggering. $3.7 million in the first 10 days, $8.2 million by the end of the month, $12.4 million by quarter's end, more than any non-presidential candidate raised in a single quarter. Republican leadership took notice. Mitch McConnell, not known for effusive praise, said publicly, "John Kennedy reminded America why the Senate exists: to deliberate seriously, to question rigorously, and to expose falsehood wherever it hides." The National Republican Senatorial Committee made Kennedy the face of their 2026 recruitment campaign. His questioning style became required viewing for GOP candidates. Campaign consultants created entire training modules. The Kennedy method: prosecuting with facts. But Kennedy remained Kennedy. He turned down book deals worth millions. I'd have to write it, and that sounds like work. He declined most speaking invitations. When the Conservative Political Action Conference offered him a primetime keynote slot, he sent a polite note. I appreciate the invitation, but I've got Crawfish to tend to. He did accept a few. Louisiana Farm Bureau annual meeting. Kennedy spoke for 12 minutes about agricultural subsidies, water management, and the importance of local farming. He mentioned the hearing only once. Sometimes in Washington, you have to remind folks that facts matter more than theater. Now, let's talk about soybean futures. Oxford University alumni dinner, back at his alma mater, Kennedy gave a more reflective speech. They taught me here that rigorous thinking defeats sloppy rhetoric every time. They taught me to respect evidence over emotion. 30 years later, those lessons still serve. Though I'll admit my Louisiana accent probably confused a few Oxford dons back in the day. Fox News Sunday with Shannon Bream. The interview was his only major media appearance, and even then, he kept it brief. Bream. Senator, you've become a conservative hero after that hearing. Any plans to leverage that into higher office? Kennedy. Shannon, I'm 73 years old. At this point, higher office sounds like a lot of stairs to climb. I'm happy right where I am. Bream. But you effectively ended a colleague's career. How do you feel about that? Kennedy's face grew serious. I didn't end her career. She did. Every document I cited was real. Every question I asked was fair. If you can't defend your own conduct, you shouldn't be questioning others. That's not partisan. That's basic integrity. Bream. What was going through your mind when she called you a white supremacist? Kennedy smiled slightly. I thought, well, this is going to be an interesting afternoon. But mainly, I was thinking about Governor Noem sitting there being slandered with lies. That wasn't right. Someone had to speak up. Bream. Any regrets? Only that it was necessary at all. I wish we lived in a world where politicians told the truth and defended their records honestly. But we don't. So sometimes you have to do the uncomfortable work of exposing dishonesty. It's not fun, but it's important. Secretary Kristi Noem's confirmation vote came 2 days after the hearing. Despite Democratic opposition, she was confirmed 51-49, with every Republican voting yes and every Democrat voting no except one. Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia voted to confirm, breaking ranks. His explanation was simple. I watched that hearing. Representative Omar failed to prove anything disqualifying about Governor Noem. In fact, she proved the opposite, that these attacks are political theater, not serious concerns. I'm voting to confirm. That single Democratic vote mattered symbolically. It signaled that Omar's assault had backfired so badly that even moderate Democrats were distancing themselves from the tactics. Noem's swearing-in ceremony was attended by an unusual mix of supporters: conservative Republicans, border state Democrats, law enforcement officials, and, notably, several Somali-American community leaders from Minneapolis who wanted to demonstrate that one congresswoman didn't speak for all Muslim Americans. At her first press conference as DHS secretary, a reporter asked about the hearing. Senator Kennedy didn't defend me because he agrees with my politics, Noem said carefully. He defended me because the accusations were false. That's what people of integrity do. They stand up for truth, regardless of party. I intend to lead this department with that same commitment to truth. I'll serve all Americans, just as I said I would. True to her word, Noem threw herself into the job. First 100 days achievements. Implemented a new border security protocol that reduced illegal crossings by 23%, while increasing asylum processing efficiency. Launched a community liaison program with Muslim, Jewish, Hispanic, and other minority communities to address security concerns collaboratively, streamlined legal immigration processes, reducing average wait times by 31%, created an interagency task force to combat human trafficking, resulting in 47 arrests in the first 2 months, testified before Congress 5 times, answering every question directly and factually. By month 6, her approval rating stood at 61%, higher than any DHS secretary in over a decade. Even CNN's polling showed 52% of Democrats approved of her job performance. The vindication was complete. The Kennedy Omar hearing became a case study in law schools, journalism schools, and political science departments. Harvard's Kennedy School held a symposium titled Accountability in Congressional Testimony, Lessons from the Noem Hearing. Professor Lawrence Tribe, a liberal constitutional scholar, surprised many by praising Kennedy's approach. He used facts, not rhetoric, documents, not demagoguery. He asked questions that demanded answers. This is what rigorous oversight looks like. The Senate needs more of it, not less. The hearing also changed behavioral norms. For House members testifying to the Senate, representatives became far more cautious about making inflammatory accusations at confirmation hearings. Several who had planned dramatic testimony about other Trump nominees quietly toned down their prepared remarks. Nobody wanted to be the next Omar. For senators, Kennedy's methodical, document-based questioning became the gold standard. Other senators began emulating his approach, prepared folders, specific questions, evidence-based challenges. The era of grandstanding speeches gave way to actual interrogation. For witnesses, nominees, and witnesses alike came far better prepared. If you were going to face the Senate, you needed to have your financial records clean, your statements consistent, and your facts straight. The Kennedy treatment awaited anyone who didn't. Some Democrats complained about the new aggressive posture. This is making the Senate more confrontational, Senator Chris Murphy said. But Kennedy replied simply, "Confronting lies isn't confrontational. It's necessary. If you don't like tough questioning, make sure you're telling the truth." 3 months after the hearing, on a cool April evening, Senator John Kennedy sat on his back porch in Madisonville, Louisiana. The sun was setting over the bayou, painting the water in shades of orange and gold. A light breeze carried the scent of magnolia and mud. His 8-year-old grandson, Johnny Jr., sat beside him with a fishing pole. Their lines disappeared into the dark water. They'd been there for 2 hours, catching and releasing bass, talking about school, baseball, and life. Kennedy's phone buzzed in his pocket. Another interview request from a national outlet. He ignored it, as he'd ignored the previous 43. "Papa," Johnny said, reeling in his line to check his bait, "my teacher showed us the video of you at school. All the kids were talking about it." Kennedy chuckled, adjusting his own line. "What did they say?" "That you made that lady real mad, that she was crying. Tommy said his mom cried too, but like happy crying. She said you were a hero." Kennedy was quiet for a moment, watching a great blue heron glide across the water in the fading light. "I'm not a hero, Johnny. I just asked questions that needed asking." "But you were really tough on her. Were you scared?" "Scared? No, son, not even a little bit." "Why not?" Kennedy reeled in his line slowly, thinking about how to explain it to an 8-year-old. "You know how your mama always tells you to tell the truth, even when it's hard?" Johnny nodded. "Well, that lady came to Washington and told lies about a good person. She made up stuff to hurt someone who didn't deserve it. And I had proof she was lying. Real documents, real records. When you have truth on your side, Johnny, you don't need to be scared." Truth is like this bayou right here. He gestured at the dark water flowing slowly past. It might move slow. People might try to dam it up, redirect it, muddy it, but it just keeps flowing. And eventually, it washes away everything that isn't real. You can't stop the truth, son. You can only delay it. A bass tugged on Johnny's line. "Papa, I got one, a big one." "Easy now," Kennedy coached, setting down his own pole to help. "Keep your rod tip up. Let him run a little. That's it. Now, reel steady. Not too fast, or you'll lose him." The fish fought hard, breaking the surface twice, its silver scales flashing in the dying light. Johnny worked the reel like Kennedy had taught him, patient and steady. After 2 minutes, Kennedy scooped the net under a beautiful 3-pound largemouth bass. "Papa, look at him! He's huge!" Kennedy held up the fish, admiring it. "That's a fine bass, Johnny. You did real good." "Can we keep him?" Kennedy examined the fish carefully, then looked at his grandson. "Here's what I think. This one's a good size, but he's got a lot more growing to do. Tell you what, let's throw him back so he can get even bigger. Then maybe we'll catch him again next year when he's learned from his mistakes." "You think he'll remember getting caught?" "Fish remember more than people think," Kennedy said gently, removing the hook and lowering the bass back into the water. It paused for a moment, as if considering what had just happened, then disappeared into the depths with a strong kick of its tail. Did he learn his lesson? I reckon so. See, that fish thought he could get an easy meal by biting something that looked good, but was really a trap. Now he knows better. Next time, he'll be more careful about what he bites. Is that what happened with that lady in the video? She bit something she shouldn't have? Kennedy smiled. That's exactly right, Johnny. She thought she could attack people with lies, and nobody would check if she was telling the truth. But somebody did check, and just like that bass, she got caught. Now she's learned her lesson the hard way. Will she be more careful next time? I don't know if there'll be a next time for her, son, but other people who watched what happened, they'll be more careful. They learned the lesson too. That's the thing about truth. When it catches one liar, it teaches 1,000 others to think twice. They fished in comfortable silence as the sun completed its descent. Bats emerged to hunt insects over the water. A bullfrog began its deep croaking call. The bayou was coming alive with evening sounds. "Papa," Johnny asked after a while, "are you really going to run for president like they say on TV?" Kennedy laughed, a genuine belly laugh that echoed across the water. "No, sir. I'm too old, too set in my ways, and too fond of this right here." He gestured at the bayou, the fishing poles, the peaceful evening. "Being president means you live in a city, work every day in meetings, and never get to go fishing. That sounds like a terrible job. But you'd be good at it. You're smart, and you tell the truth." "Maybe, but being good at something doesn't mean you have to do it. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is exactly what you're meant to do, right where you are. And I'm meant to be in Louisiana, representing people like you and your mama and your grandma and fishing in this bayou whenever I can. Will you keep being a senator?" "For a while longer, yeah, until they get sick of me or I get sick of them, whichever comes first." Johnny giggled. "You're funny, Papa. And you're a good fisherman. Look, you got another one." Indeed, Johnny's rod was bending again. Another bass, another fight, another lesson about patience and steady hands. As Johnny landed his third fish of the evening, Kennedy thought about the hearing, about Omar's destroyed credibility, about Noem's vindication, about the thousands of messages he'd received thanking him for telling it like it is. But mostly, he thought about this. Sitting on his porch with his grandson, teaching him to fish and tell the truth and do the right thing, even when it's hard. This was what mattered, not the cable news appearances or the fundraising halls or the presidential speculation. This, the bayou, the truth, the next generation. Getting dark, Johnny. Time to head in. Your grandma's making gumbo. 5 more minutes? Kennedy smiled. All right, 5 more minutes. But then we got to clean these poles and get inside. As they sat in the gathering darkness, the bayou flowing eternal before them, Kennedy thought about Omar's political career lying in ruins, about the lesson Washington had learned, about truth's slow but inevitable victory. The bayou had swallowed another predator, and life went on, patient and eternal, separating truth from lies, substance from theater, integrity from corruption, just like it always had, just like it always would. And somewhere in Washington, politicians of both parties were learning the most important lesson of all: tell the truth or face the consequences. Because somewhere in Louisiana, an old senator with a folksy accent and a sharp mind was watching, and he had receipts.